There are moments in life when silence feels like a sentence, when the heavens seem closed and the weight of our struggles presses so hard upon our souls that we wonder if God is even listening. The nights grow long, the prayers grow weary, and yet the answers seem delayed, hidden beyond the veil of time. Many have cried out in desperation, asking, "Does God see my pain? Does He hear my prayer?" And in the stillness, when doubt seeks to drown faith, the whisper of truth remains. God sees, God hears, and God knows. But why does He delay? Why does He allow pain to linger and battles to stretch beyond what seems bearable? Could it be that the delay is not denial but preparation? Could it be that what seems like silence is actually the orchestration of something far greater than we can perceive? If you've ever felt like your prayers have gone unnoticed, if you've ever wondered why your struggles seem endless, then stay with me. Because what you are about to hear will shift your perspective, transform your faith, and remind you of a truth that cannot be shaken. The story of struggle is not new. From the beginning of time, mankind has wrestled with the burdens of life, with the weight of uncertainty, with the pressing question, where is God in my pain? And yet, throughout history, the evidence remains. He has never forsaken those who call upon Him. When the children of Israel groaned under the oppression of Egypt, when their cries rose day and night, it may have seemed as though their prayers fell on deaf ears, but the Word declares, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people, and I have heard their cry." God not only saw, but He heard, and when the time was right, He moved. You see, the problem is not that God is unaware. The issue is that we often misunderstand His process. We think that because the answer has not come in our timing, it means He has ignored us. But a seed planted does not bear fruit immediately. A foundation laid is not the completion of a house. There is a process, and God is the master architect. He builds according to His divine plan, not according to our impatience. Think about the life of Joseph, a young man with dreams given by God, yet instead of immediate fulfillment, he found himself in a pit. Betrayed, sold, falsely accused, imprisoned, forgotten. If Joseph had measured God's faithfulness by his circumstances, he would have concluded that God neither saw nor heard. But the absence of visible evidence does not mean the absence of divine activity. Even in prison, God was working. Even in the pit, God was preparing. Even in the years of waiting, God was setting the stage for something greater than Joseph could have imagined. The enemy wants you to believe that your struggles are a sign that God has abandoned you. He wants to convince you that because the door hasn't opened yet, it never will. But the truth is, your struggle is not a sign of abandonment. It is the proof of your preparation. It is the confirmation that God is still molding you, still refining you, still aligning every detail for the perfect moment of manifestation. Look at Hannah, a woman burdened with barrenness, mocked by those around her, pouring out her soul year after year. Her prayers seemed unanswered, her pain seemed unnoticed, but God was not ignoring her. He was aligning her, because when the answer finally came, it was not just for her, it was for a nation. Samuel was not just a son, he was a prophet, a leader, a divine instrument for Israel. And had Hannah received her answer prematurely, she would not have been prepared to dedicate him back to God as she did. So what does this mean for you? It means that your struggles are not in vain. Your prayers are not lost. Heaven has not overlooked you. But God's answers come in appointed times. He is not moved by human urgency. He is governed by divine timing. And in His time, He makes all things beautiful. But here is the key. While you wait, do not stop believing. While you endure, do not stop praying. While you struggle, do not stop trusting. Because the moment you align your faith with His promises, you step into the certainty that He is not just aware of your situation, He is actively working in it. Elijah stood on Mount Carmel praying for rain after a long drought. He sent his servant to look, and 6 times there was nothing. But the 7th time a small cloud appeared. God had already ordained the downpour, but Elijah had to persist in faith. What if he had stopped at the 6th prayer? What if he had given up before the breakthrough? Too many people abandon their faith in the waiting season, They allow the delay to redefine their belief in God's goodness. But just because you don't see the answer yet doesn't mean it's not on the way. Some prayers are like battles. They require endurance. Some breakthroughs are like locked doors. They require persistence. Some blessings are like hidden treasures. They require patience. But the promise remains. God sees, God hears, and God responds. The book of Revelation speaks of golden bowls filled with the prayers of the saints. Do you know what that means? It means your prayers are not scattered in the wind. They are collected, stored, treasured. Every tear you have shed, every cry you have uttered, every whisper in the midnight hour has been captured. And when the bowl reaches its fullness, the answer is released. The woman with the issue of blood pressed through the crowd. She had suffered for 12 long years, seeking help, seeking healing, spending all she had. And yet, in one moment of faith, in one touch of belief, she drew power from the Savior. What if she had given up in year 11? What if she had settled in her suffering? She would have missed the miracle that had always been within reach. And so I ask you, how close are you to your breakthrough? How near is your appointed time? Could it be that you are only one prayer away, one act of faith away, one moment of endurance away from the manifestation of what God has already promised? Do not be deceived by the illusion of delay. God is neither deaf nor blind. He is attentive. He is present. He is moving even when you cannot see it. And the struggle you face today will one day be the testimony that reminds someone else that God is faithful. Because He sees, He hears, and He answers. The weight of waiting can feel unbearable. It can stretch the soul to its limits, making even the strongest question whether God is truly near. There is a breaking point in every person's life where they look up to the heavens and say, "How much longer, Lord?" It is the moment where faith wrestles with reality, where trust is tested against trials. And yet it is in this very place, in this sacred tension between hope and despair, that God does His greatest work. Because if you could see everything, you wouldn't need faith. If you had all the answers, you wouldn't need to trust. And God is not only shaping your destiny, He is shaping you. Look at Job, a man described as upright and blameless, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. Yet in a moment, everything he had was stripped away. His wealth, his children, his health, gone. His friends questioned him. His wife told him to curse God and die. And in his anguish, he lamented the day of his birth. If there was ever a man who had a reason to believe that God had turned away, it was Job. But what Job could not see was that his suffering was not a sign of God's absence, but a stage for God's revelation. Because in the end, God restored him, giving him double for his trouble. But the restoration was not just about material blessings. It was about a deeper knowledge of God. Job himself declared, "Before my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Could it be that what you are facing right now is not meant to destroy you, but to introduce you to a dimension of God that you have never known before? Could it be that the prayers you have been praying, the ones that seem unanswered, are actually preparing you for a revelation greater than you could have imagined? God's process is often hidden from human understanding. We live in a world that demands instant results, immediate gratification, quick solutions. But God is not in a hurry. He is more concerned with your development than your deliverance. He is more interested in your character than your convenience. He knows that if He answers too soon, you may not be ready to handle the blessing. If He releases the breakthrough prematurely, it may crush you instead of lift you. So He allows the process to refine you, to strengthen you, to prepare you for what He has already set aside for you. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before he stepped into his calling. David was anointed king as a teenager, but spent years running from Saul before he sat on the throne. Paul, after encountering Jesus on the road to Damascus, spent years in preparation before stepping into his apostolic mission. If the greatest figures in history had to endure a process, why would we expect anything different? The truth is, the delay is not punishment, it is positioning. God is aligning the right people, the right circumstances, the right opportunities, and while you wait, He is working. He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating details you cannot yet perceive. He is softening hearts, arranging divine connections, setting the stage for His perfect will to unfold. But waiting is not passive, waiting is warfare. Because in the waiting, the enemy will whisper lies. He will tell you that God has forgotten you, that your prayers are meaningless, that nothing will ever change. He will try to plant seeds of doubt, discouragement, and despair. That is why you must stand firm. You must hold on to the promises of God, even when everything around you suggests otherwise. You must declare His goodness, even when your situation looks bleak. You must remind yourself that faith is not based on what you see, but on who He is. Consider Daniel, who fasted and prayed for 21 days, seeking an answer from God. What he did not know was that from the very first day he prayed, the answer had already been released. But in the spiritual realm, there was resistance. The prince of Persia, a demonic force, fought against the angel bringing the response. It was only through persistence in prayer that the breakthrough finally came. Imagine if Daniel had given up on day 20. Imagine if he had assumed that because he did not see immediate results, God had ignored him. How many prayers have been on the verge of being answered, but the believer gave up too soon? How many breakthroughs were just beyond the horizon, but impatience caused the person to turn back? Heaven moves on the prayers of the persistent. The enemy cannot stop what God has ordained, but he can try to convince you to stop believing before it manifests. That is why the Bible repeatedly tells us to stand firm, to persevere, to hold on. And while you wait, let your heart remain in worship. Worship shifts the atmosphere. Worship invites the presence of God into your situation. It reminds you that He is bigger than your problem, greater than your struggle, mightier than your opposition. Paul and Silas, beaten and imprisoned, did not wait for their chains to break before they worshipped. They worshipped while they were still bound. And in their praise, the prison shook and their freedom came. Sometimes God does not remove the storm immediately. Sometimes He allows the winds to rage and the waves to crash, not because He wants to see you suffer, but because He wants to teach you that He is Lord even in the storm. The disciples panicked in the boat, thinking they would perish, but Jesus was right there. He was present even when it seemed like He was asleep. Your struggle has not escaped His notice. Your prayers have not been lost in the wind. He sees, He hears, and He is moving, but He is also waiting. Waiting for you to trust, waiting for you to surrender, waiting for you to believe that His ways are higher than yours. The temptation in hardship is to let your circumstances define your theology. It is to start believing that because things are difficult, God is distant. But faith does not adjust to circumstances. It stands on truth. The 3 Hebrew boys standing before the fiery furnace declared that God was able to deliver them. But their faith did not rest on the outcome. It rested on God's character. They said, even if He does not, we will not bow. That kind of faith shakes hell. That kind of faith moves mountains. That kind of faith refuses to be dictated by what the natural eye can see. So what will you believe? Will you allow the delay to weaken your faith, or will you allow it to deepen your trust? Will you let your struggles convince you that God is absent, or will you use them as proof that He is preparing you for something greater? There are moments in life when the answer comes suddenly, when the miracle appears without warning, when the breakthrough happens overnight. But more often than not, God's answers come in seasons. They unfold gradually, like the rising of the sun. And if you are in a season of waiting, if you are in a place where you feel unheard and unseen, know this: God is faithful. He has seen every tear, heard every cry, captured every prayer. And at the appointed time, what He has promised will come to pass. Not a second too early, not a moment too late. Because He is not only the God of the answer, He is the God of the process. And when you understand that, you will no longer see waiting as wasted time, you will see it as preparation. Because the God who sees your struggles and hears your prayers is the same God who will bring them to fulfillment. As you navigate through the wilderness of life, in the midst of struggles that seem unending, it can be easy to wonder if your prayers are merely echoing into an empty void. You might ask yourself, Does God truly hear me? Does He even care about the depth of my pain? These questions surface when the storm rages for too long, when the silence is deafening, and when your heart feels overwhelmed by the weight of unanswered prayers. Yet it is in these very moments that God's presence is the most real, even when you cannot feel it. His silence does not equate to absence. His timing does not mean denial. The reality is that God sees and He hears, but often He works in ways that are beyond our comprehension. There is a deeper truth at play when it feels like the heavens are silent. God is a sovereign creator, orchestrating events and details that we may never fully understand in this lifetime. Every moment, every challenge, every prayer is part of a divine plan that is unfolding. Sometimes we are simply in the waiting room of God's grand design. What may seem like an unanswered prayer is merely a season of preparation. The waiting process is God's way of preparing you for something bigger, something that will require your full readiness, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. When you look at the stories of those who were mightily used by God, their journeys were rarely smooth or swift. They faced prolonged periods of waiting, of uncertainty, and of suffering before the promise was fulfilled. Take Abraham, for instance. God promised him a son, a legacy that would last for generations, yet it took 25 years for that promise to come to fruition. During that long wait, Abraham's faith was tested, refined, and strengthened. God did not promise Abraham a shortcut to the fulfillment of the promise. Instead, He promised him a journey, a process through which Abraham would learn more about God's character and about trusting Him even in the midst of the unknown. Abraham's struggle was not in vain. It was part of the divine orchestration of God's will. When Isaac was finally born, Abraham's faith had been strengthened beyond measure, and he could see God's goodness and faithfulness like never before. Similarly, when Joseph was sold into slavery by his brothers, it would have been easy to conclude that God had abandoned him. Yet Joseph's story reveals that God's providence was at work even in the midst of betrayal and hardship. Every setback, every moment of suffering was a stepping stone that led Joseph to his position of power in Egypt. God saw every injustice, heard every prayer, and worked behind the scenes to fulfill His plan for Joseph's life. In hindsight, Joseph was able to say to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." This profound perspective didn't come from a place of easy answers, but from a deep trust in God's ability to use every circumstance for His greater purpose. The same is true for you today. Your struggles, no matter how difficult or how long-letting, are not without purpose. Your pain is not in vain, and your prayers are not unheard. God is at work even when you cannot see it. His timing is perfect, and His plan for you is unfolding even in the most challenging seasons of life. And though it may feel like the heavens are silent, know this: God is listening, and He is responding according to His perfect will. As you continue on your journey, the key is to remain steadfast in your faith. The enemy's greatest weapon is discouragement. He wants to convince you that God has forgotten you, that your prayers are falling on deaf ears, and that your situation will never change. But the truth is that God's response may not always come in the way you expect or at the time you desire. Sometimes His answer comes in unexpected forms, through people, through circumstances, or through a deep inner peace that transcends understanding. Other times, His response is a no or a not yet, which can be just as significant as an immediate yes. Take the Apostle Paul, for example. Paul, who was anointed and appointed by God, had his share of struggles. He prayed 3 times for a thorn in his flesh to be removed, but God's response was not the healing Paul sought. Instead, God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul did not get the answer he expected, but what he received was far greater: a deeper understanding of God's sufficiency, a stronger reliance on God's power, and an abiding peace that transcended his circumstances. Sometimes the answer to your prayer is not a change in your situation, but a transformation in your heart. The Bible is full of stories of people who endured great struggles, yet God was with them every step of the way. Job, who lost everything but never lost his faith, learned that even in the midst of unbearable pain, God is present and faithful. The Israelites, who wandered in the desert for 40 years, learned that even in the wilderness, God provides. David, who faced countless battles, learned that even in the midst of war, God is his refuge and strength. And each of these individuals experienced moments of doubt, moments when it seemed like God was far away, yet in the end they discovered that God was always with them, always listening, and always working behind the scenes. This is the same God who hears your prayers and sees your struggles. He is not distant or detached from your pain. He is intimately aware of every trial you face, every fear that grips your heart, and every prayer you utter. And while you may not always understand his timing, you can trust in his character. God is not a man that he should lie, nor is he fickle in his promises. When he says that he will never leave you or forsake you, he means it. When he says that he has plans to prosper you and not to harm you, he is faithful to bring those plans to fruition. The journey of faith is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Every struggle, every moment of waiting is an opportunity for God to deepen your faith and reveal more of his glory. It is in the trials that you learn to depend on him, to trust in his goodness, and to experience his faithfulness in ways that would not be possible without the struggle. The Bible tells us that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and that perseverance leads to maturity. Through the struggles and the unanswered prayers, God is making you more like him, shaping you into the person you were always meant to be. And so as you face your struggles, as you wait for the answers to your prayers, remember this: God sees you, he hears you, and he is at work in your life. Your prayers are not in vain. Your pain is not without purpose. And though it may feel like the heavens are silent, God is listening, and his answer is coming. Every season of life has its purpose, and each moment, each prayer, each tear is a part of a greater story that God is telling in your life. The story may not always unfold according to your timeline or in the way you expect, but it will always unfold according to his perfect plan. And when the answer comes, when the breakthrough arrives, when the struggle is finally over, you will see that every prayer, every moment of waiting was worth it. Because in the end, God is not only answering your prayers, he is shaping your destiny, and his plan for you is greater than you could ever imagine. I understand the pain and the heaviness that come with feeling as though your prayers are unanswered. And yet, I want to tell you that even when it feels like the heavens are silent, God is at work. You may not always see the immediate results of your prayers, and it may seem as if your cries are falling on deaf ears, but the truth remains: God sees your struggles and hears your prayers. The essence of faith is not found in the quickness of answers, but in the trust we place in God's timing and his ability to work behind the scenes in ways we often cannot comprehend. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in a room filled with darkness. You reach out to God, desperate for his help, longing for his light to break through. The darkness is suffocating, the silence overwhelming, but in the stillness, God is present. He is moving. He is working. Even though you cannot see him, feel him, or hear him, he is there, and he is doing something in your life that will bring glory to his name. That is the kind of God we serve, a God who is not confined to our timelines or our understanding. He operates in the realm of eternity, where every moment is purposeful and every detail is accounted for. The truth is that God does not waste any part of your journey. Every moment of pain, every trial, every unanswered prayer is an opportunity for God to build something in you. A strength, a resilience, a character that is more like his own. This process of refinement can be difficult to endure, but it is through the fire that gold is purified. It is through the storms that we learn to trust, to lean on him, and to experience his faithfulness in ways that we could never have imagined. Look at the lives of those who walk closely with God in the Bible. They too experienced times of great struggle, of waiting, of unanswered prayers. And yet, through it all, they learned to trust in God's character, knowing that he is always faithful, even when the circumstances don't align with what they expected. Consider the story of David. He was anointed as king when he was a young shepherd, but the fulfillment of that promise took years. He spent much of that time running from Saul, hiding in caves, and enduring hardship. And yet, in the midst of it all, David wrote psalms of praise, declaring that God was his refuge and strength, his shield and his deliverer. He didn't wait for the throne to come before he praised God. He praised God in the waiting, in the struggle, in the uncertainty. We also see this in the life of Moses. Moses was called by God to deliver the Israelites from slavery, but the path to freedom was not immediate. For 40 years, Moses wandered in the wilderness, learning to trust God in the most difficult of circumstances. He spent years in the desert before he even stepped into his calling. But in those years of waiting, God was preparing Moses for the task at hand. He was shaping his character, refining his faith, and teaching him to depend fully on God's provision. When Moses finally led the Israelites out of Egypt, he did so with a deep understanding of God's faithfulness and power. The same is true for each one of us. God may have given you a vision, a promise, or a calling, but the road to fulfillment may not be immediate. It may take years of preparation, of waiting, of enduring trials. But know this, God is using every single moment to prepare you for what He has in store. The struggles you face today are not without purpose. The unanswered prayers are not without meaning. God sees, God hears, and He is working behind the scenes to bring about His perfect plan for your life. It is also important to recognize that God's answers to our prayers are not always what we expect. We often pray for deliverance from a situation, but God may be using that very situation to teach us something about ourselves and about Him. When the Apostle Paul prayed for God to remove the thorn in his flesh, God's response was not to take it away. Instead, God said, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul learned to rely on God's strength, not his own, and in doing so, he discovered a deeper level of intimacy with God. Sometimes the answer to our prayers is not the removal of our struggles, but the revelation of God's presence and power in the midst of them. This truth can be difficult to accept, especially when we are in the midst of intense suffering. But it is in our weakness that God's power is most clearly displayed. When we are at our lowest, when we feel as though we cannot go on, that is when God's strength is most evident. He does not leave us to fight alone. He is there with us, strengthening us, empowering us, and giving us the grace we need to endure. And when we emerge from the struggle, we are stronger, more resilient, and more dependent on Him than ever before. God's timing is often different from ours, but His timing is always perfect. When you are in the midst of waiting, it can be easy to become discouraged, to wonder if God has forgotten you. But I want to remind you that God is never late. His timing is always right. What you may not understand in the moment, you will come to realize as you look back on your life. The things that seemed like delays were actually God's protection, His preparation, His provision. He was working behind the scenes, aligning people, events, and circumstances to bring about His perfect plan for you. In the story of Joseph, we see this truth powerfully illustrated. Joseph had a dream that his brothers would bow down to him, but the path to that dream was filled with betrayal, false accusations, and years of imprisonment. It would have been easy for Joseph to give up, to believe that God had forgotten him, that his dream would never come to pass. But Joseph held on to his faith, knowing that God had a purpose for his life. And when the time was right, God raised Joseph up to a place of authority in Egypt, where he was able to save his family and many others from famine. Looking back, Joseph could see how each trial, each struggle was a necessary part of God's plan. He recognized that what others meant for evil, God meant for good. This is the perspective we must cultivate in our own lives. When we are in the midst of hardship, it can be difficult to see beyond the pain. But if we trust that God is good, that He is working all things together for our good, we can find peace even in the most difficult of circumstances. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding is far beyond ours. His plans for us are good, and He is faithful to bring them to completion. As you walk through life, remember that God is with you. He sees your struggles. He hears your prayers. And even when it seems like nothing is happening, Know that He is at work behind the scenes. His plan for you is far greater than anything you can imagine. And He is using every trial, every prayer, every moment of waiting to bring you closer to the fulfillment of His promises. Trust Him, lean on Him, and know that in the end, His will be done and His name will be glorified. In the journey of life, when it feels like the weight of your struggles is too much to bear and the silence of unanswered prayers becomes overwhelming, remember this. God sees you, He hears you, and He is working behind the scenes in ways you cannot always perceive. Every challenge, every moment of waiting is a part of His divine plan, shaping and preparing you for something greater. His timing is perfect, His understanding far beyond ours, and His purpose always good. Even in the darkest moments, trust that God is refining your character, strengthening your faith, and drawing you closer to the fulfillment of His promises. You may not always see the results immediately, but God's faithfulness remains unwavering. Keep trusting, keep praying, and know that He is faithful to complete the work He has begun in your life. Your breakthrough is coming, and His plans for you are greater than you can imagine.